Over 50 years later, Rita Curran's family is finally getting some closure after her rape and murder in this Burlington apartment on Brooks Avenue.
This is our case, and this is our sister, and she's always with us.
Well, you didn't want to know I was by your side.
Rita was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1947. In the early 1950s, her family, her parents, and the two younger siblings moved to Milton, Vermont, a small town 15 miles north of Burlington. Though Rita attended college in Burlington, she grew up in Milton and always lived with her parents, even during her college years. After graduating, Rita pursued and graduated studies in reading and language arts at the University of Vermont. She was a member of the Milton Women's Club alongside her mother. She sang with all the women's barbershops quartets called the Champlain Echoes and taught religion classes at St. Anne's Catholic Church in Milton. She remained active in her community and participated in the Alumni Association of Trinity College. Now, when I read that first, that she was in the barbershop quartet again, I was like, what? They got barbershop quartets? They got to bring that back. They really do. Anyway, Rita was really petite. She weighed around 100 pounds. She was really, really small with shoulder length, reddish brown hair. Despite all her accomplishments, though, she kind of suffered with some, confidence and her self-conscious. She was often referred to herself, right, as the ugly duckling and expressed hopes of someday really getting married. So, she did deal with some sort of, visual problems. What am I saying here? Jesus. Visual problems. Anyway, she had attended 3 weddings in the past year alone and confided to friends that she had moved to Burlington because all the eligible bachelors in Milton were already taken. So she was really hoping to snag somebody and hopefully move on to a happily ever after. Well, Rita, the whole time, was trying to move out, and she had found a new apartment. In June 1971, Rita moved into a small 3-unit apartment building in Burlington. Her unit, a 2-bedroom apartment with a kitchen and a living room, was on the left side of the building after climbing a short set of stairs to the porch. She shared the apartment with another woman. This woman was Beverly, who was almost the same age as Rita. She was born just 1 day before her. Rita really didn't know Beverly before moving in and struggled to kind of feel comfortable in her new living situation. She confided in her mother that she planned to move out soon, mentioning concerns about the boy that was frequently sleeping on the couch. But Rita's sister and Mary later revealed that Rita felt out of place with her roommates and spent most of her time back home anyways with her parents. Although she did try to adapt to her new environment, the apartment was not the haven that she really hoped for. Rita's life was always marked by her devotion to her family, again, her education, her community. It was all rooted in values that she grew up with, which made the unfamiliar dynamics of her, the new living arrangement, the new roommate, it just felt all out of step with her personality, so she just wasn't really having it, and all that was expressed to her sister and to her mother. The night of Rita's death, on Monday, July 19th, Rita went to work at Colonial for her regular shift. She had been in her new home for about a month, so she worked from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. that afternoon. That evening, she went to practice with her a cappella singing group, the Champlain Echoes, at a community center on North Avenue in Burlington. Practice that day went kind of late, and she returned to her apartment around 10 p.m. Her roommate, Beverly, was home, and Rita told her that she was heading to bed. Though Rita was fast asleep by that point, her other roommate's boyfriend called up Beverly and invited her out to a harbor getaway for drinks. So Beverly decided to join him and her other roommates, Carrie and Paul, leaving Rita completely slumbering peacefully. Between 11:20, when Beverly left, and 12:30, when the trio returned to the apartment, something terrible happened. A man, a predator, snuck into Rita's apartment and made his way into her bedroom. She was in her bed under the covers when he found her. Though she struggled against him, she was not very strong. Remember, she was 100 pounds. He beat her face severely, violently raped her, and then strangled her to death. And just as quietly as he entered, he slipped away, having extinguished a vibrant young life. At 12:30, her young roommate Carrie, who was just 19 years old, remember, and her boyfriend Paul, who was 23 years old, returned home. Beverly lingered a little longer at the bar, but returned home shortly. They all noticed that Rita's bedroom was kind of open, but they didn't really, it didn't strike them as unusual. They just left it there, but they just tried to keep their voices down. And, while they were in the living room, and they lingered onto their sofas and chairs and, chatting. They had no idea that the roommate was dead in the other room. Around 1:20 a.m., Beverly went to get something from the bedroom, and she discovered Rita's body, laying on her back on the floor, directly inside the bedroom door. Paul heard a scream, pleading to Paul and Carrie to come quick. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Paul checked for a pulse, but she was cold to the touch. He told Beverly to call the hospital or call the emergency number. They asked the operator to quickly connect them with the medical center emergency room, but after quickly explaining the situation, they transferred them to a fire department. In short order, 2 people from the Burlington Fire Department ambulance crew arrived, David Bean and Stephen Olio. They realized right away that they couldn't really do anything. That was actually a crime scene that they had just walked into, so they called the Burlington Police Department and they told them that there had been a murder. Now, the police arrived. They roped off the scene, asking the roommates to stay, obviously, on the couches in the living room. They relayed the information to the dispatch, and the commanding officer at the station summoned several police officers to, obviously, detectives at the scene. While waiting for the detectives to arrive, he questioned all 3 witnesses in the living room. Obviously, you just walk into a scene like this, you have to know what they saw. The PD was first contacted by the fire department around 1:30, and by 1:50, there was the chief of detectives that had arrived already at the station. By 2:15, he and 2 other detectives were on site. Shortly after, 2 others arrived. There was 2 other medical doctors, so on and so forth. I will not bore you with all this stuff. But the police made some observations about how Rita was found. She was found face up, laying on her back, unfortunately with both arms outstretched, her legs spread wide apart, and her head was tilted to the left. The front of her body was completely nude. She was wearing a red and white polka dot house coat that had been ripped down to the front, popping off several of its buttons, which were later obviously retrieved as evidence. Beneath the house coat, Rita also wore an aqua blue silk nightgown with like a lace trim, and it too was ripped down to the front. The lower section of her nightgown was actually found by the doorway and to the closet. There was also a white bedsheet and a tan afghan that was kind of wrapped around her leg, and it continued under her bottom. A pair of pink silk panties were ripped from both legs and found underneath her left leg. Her hair had been in curlers, or like wire rollers, you could call them, but they were ripped from her head and strewn all around the room. There was blood splatter on the walls, and there was smears all around her body on the floor, literally creating an outline of where she lay. So you can imagine, like a snow angel. This is a blood angel. Her face, especially her forehead and her upper cheek, were severely beaten. The left side of her face was especially swollen. Both eyes were completely black and blue, and there was a slight cuts and scratches basically all over her face. And there was dried blood on her face, lips, and teeth. Bruises were completely visible on her right leg, just above the knee as well. And Rita's left hand had hair, which they believed was taken as evidence because it could possibly be part of the perpetrator. An outline of the body was made with a blue marking pencil on the floor. Rita's purse, which contained $20 cash and personal papers such as her driver's license, was on the floor directly behind her. There was a lace curtain that was ripped down on the west side of the room. And also, her car, which was parked in the front of the apartment building, had not been tampered with. The medical examiner wanted to roll her body to the side to examine her back. When they did that, they discovered a cigarette butt under her right arm, which would really be the key evidence to this whole case. It had not been crushed or smushed out. It had burned out at the scene. Its ashes rested on the floor underneath her arm. The paper on the tobacco side of the filters was jagged, suggesting it had gone out on its own after smoldering for some time. The brand of the cigarette, especially, it was called Lark, was an unusual kind of cigarette. It had a unique style of filter that contained small granulates of charcoal. It was distinctive. Lark was an extremely popular brand of cigarette in Japan, but never had much of a market in the US. The brand started kind of like in 1963, meaning it had been only around for like 8 years. The back of Rita's body was checked and there was no visible bruising. The detectives and the medical examiners took a bunch of photos documenting everything. At approximately 4:45 a.m., an undertaker was called to take Rita's body to the morgue. Police took some chips from the door as evidence, also part of the flooring on which Rita was laying, all of the clothing that she was wearing, the curlers and the buttons from the floor, and a sample of dirt from the floor. After the body was removed, a latent fingerprint expert was called to examine the crime scene, but nothing usable was found. Now, police initially interviewed over 50 people around the building, around Rita's workplace, anyone that she knew in the choir. I'm talking, if I'm not mistaken, it was over 100 people, if I'm not mistaken. And one of those people, obviously, was the neighbors. And they did interview all of them, especially the upstairs neighbor. Now, this is what really drew my attention to this case tenfold. Now, when the police interviewed the upstairs neighbor, this man named William was also married. But unfortunately, the wife gave a pretty good alibi. So police went along their merry way. Like many cases back then, obviously, it went unsolved. Unfortunately, in 1971, DNA testing wasn't really a thing, and the case quickly, obviously, went dead. They really had the blood, they had a few of the hair curlers, they had, obviously, the cigarette, and they thought maybe, well, we'll save this for later, and hopefully science will prove us correct. Obviously, depressing fact is that even in 1971, obviously, they had like handwriting analysis, polygraph test. It wasn't really cutting edge. It wasn't, genealogy like today. So obviously, all they had was the interviews, what people said, the alibis that they had to go on, and the forensic evidence that they had. And pretty much that's it. So unfortunately, it did go cold, and it went cold for a very long time. It went cold for 50 years. Now, obviously, as the case went cold, police interviewed everyone and anyone that they could possibly interview. Talking neighbors, talking people who saw her, talking her acquaintances, her father, mother, everyone, including, obviously, suspects that were already incarcerated. And one of those that was investigated was Ted Bundy. Crazy connection, but the location of the motel where Curran actually worked at was adjacent to serial killer Ted Bundy's birthplace, Elizabeth Lune home of the unwed mothers. Similarities known to Bundy's crime scenes led retired FBI agent John Bissett to propose him as an actual suspect. Crazy to think about, but actually, Curran's sister wrote to Bundy while he was being held in Florida's death row to inquire whether he was responsible for Curran's death, but in response, the FBI informed her that Bundy had declined to confirm or deny any culpability, really. No evidence really firmly placed Bundy in Burlington on that date, although this is crazy. There was a note that a person named Bundy was bitten by a dog that week. Detective Robert D. Capel questioned Bundy, who said he murdered a young woman in Burlington when he was there in 1971. But on January 22nd, 1989, the eve of his execution, Bundy actually denied to the FBI Special Agent William Hagmaier any involvement in the Curran case, which, there you go. I guess you got to take his word for what it is. Case closed on Ted Bundy. But this was obviously back in 1989. We're talking, this is 1971, 1989. Even even as close as, 2014, there was lead ups. 2019, there was lead ups. There was lead ups all the way up to 2023. But unfortunately, we have to rewind and go back to 1989. Ted Bundy obviously denies any doing. And then a little bit after that, unfortunately, 1991, Rita's father, Thomas Curran, dies at the age of 68 after a long battle with cancer. He fought in World War II, and he had a 21-year career with IBM. Then, bad news strikes again. 11 years later, in 2002, Rita's mother, Mary Curran, a nurse and a devoted community member in Milton, succumbs to Lou Gehrig's disease at the age of 83. Both of them were unable to see justice for their daughter. The justice that would eventually come thanks to technology in 2023. In 2014, there was a major break in the case. Burlington police detectives Jeff Burworth was working on the case, and he sent some physical evidence from the archives to the New York City office of the chief medical examiner for DNA testing. What did he send? Obviously, the large cigarette butt, the fingernail scrapings, and actual 8 vaginal slides. They were shipped on September 19th, and just a little bit after, October 29th, the lab sent some results. It was male DNA profile and was isolated to the cigarette butt. This key information was then entered to CODIS, which is like a national DNA database used by law enforcement. I think we all know what CODIS is at this point if we're watching videos like this, as well as several others. But over the 8 years that it was in CODIS, they ran this DNA profile against every single potential suspect, just like Ted Bundy or any other person. All 13 men on the list were all completely ruled out. And for the sake of thoroughness, they even ran it against Paul, the roommate, and the actual first responders. Again, no match. Then we got some more news in 2016, which was actually the 45th anniversary of the case. They had a press conference. They said they will never forget and that they will not stop to seek justice. A week later, police gave an update explaining to the press and explaining the case. It was getting a boost. Obviously, forensic science, again, we're at 2016. This is 45 years deep. Technology has gone a long way. But then in the 50th anniversary, 2021, 5 years went by with no DNA matches from CODIS, and an article was published on the 50th anniversary of Rita's death. Her case at the point was the oldest case under investigation by Burlington PD. Obviously, they are losing hope. The family was losing hope. On Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, Burlington PD finally broke the news that they had solved the case. They released a detailed investigative report that walked the public through the steps that led to the actual conclusion, which leads us to the wonderful part where this story really takes a crazy turn. In the summer of 2022, they sent the cigarette butt to Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia. They again extracted a full DNA profile from the butt and entered the information into a GED match and a family tree DNA, two ancestry sites where participants basically have given their permission to have law enforcement use their blood and DNA to basically solve crimes. Wild. Anyways, that's the first time I ever heard of anything like that. On August 11th, Parabon asked for a list of any suspects that were kind of like not been previously eliminated. And just to make it all kind of short, the evidence was actually overwhelming. They identified a living half-brother, right? And from the half-brother named Douglas, Burlington PD contacted, asked him for a DNA sample. He was cooperative and provided it to the police again. And it was a match to the obvious suspect, William DeRuse. The evidence was overwhelming, and the DNA on the panties matched the DNA on the housecoat, which matched the DNA on the cigarette butt. And it all belonged to William. Who is William? Well, William was the next door neighbor, the upstairs neighbor, the one with the beautiful alibi that was given to by the wife, which he kind of forced on his wife. Anyways, let's find a little bit more about who William DeRose is, because this guy has an incredible story. And by me incredible, he is the biggest piece of shit ever. And he continued to be a piece of shit for a really long time. And somehow, some way, it was like 50 pieces of shit later. When I tell you the things this guy did before he actually committed what he did, it's just like red flag after red flag after red flag. But without further ado, let's find out who this, again, piece of shit is, William DeRose.
I keep on telling you well, you don't come home from nights out, I will be kicking you out.
William was born December 14th, 1939 in Chicago, Illinois. His mother, Louise, died 2 months later at 27 years old. He was her only child. His father, William Sr., remarried 5 years later, and they had a child together in 1947. William had a half-brother. His parents divorced right shortly after, and his brother was born. His father married again in 1948 when William was 9 years old to a young Japanese woman named Nobuko. William Sr. was 35 years old and Nobuko was 21, this guy. They had at least one child together. Fast forward to 1970, William Jr. was 31 years old at the time, living in San Francisco. He went by Bill. He was practicing Buddhism at the Zen Center, which had an American outpost in Japanese Buddhism called Soto Zen, a very popular religion in Japan. Even today, there are 14,000 temples worldwide. The Zen Center was founded in 1962 and grew rapidly in the 60s. Many of the students it attracted were hippies and beatniks. William met Michelle, who was 23 years old. She was also into the Buddhist scene. She described him as a great storyteller with greenish colored eyes. She said he was tall and recalled that he was missing a portion of his left pinky finger. God, jeez. She said that he did not drink alcohol or use drugs, and as he was a, quote, serious Buddhist. He confessed to her that he had been to prison twice in California, which included a 2-year stint for armed robbery. They dated for a while, but Michelle broke up with William and moved back with her family in Burlington, Vermont in the spring of 1971. That should have been red flag number 1 there, but whatever. Michelle said that her father was the plant manager at IBM, the same place where Rita's father worked. Here we go. William then decided to follow her, moving to Burlington unexpectedly. Michelle's parents met him and were not thrilled about her dating him. Nonetheless, they got back together. In June of 1971, Michelle's parents moved to a small town in Canada, so she and William moved in together to an apartment in Burlington, the same apartment house that Rita would later occupy. William and Michelle's address was 15 Brooks Ave, while Rita's was 17 Brooks Ave. Though they were different addresses, they were different units in the same building. Rita was on the first floor, while they were on the third floor. William told her of his dream of opening a barbershop in Burlington, having children together, and raising a family. Michelle bought into his dream, and they got married in July 5th in a small, sudden ceremony. Their apartment was essentially a studio apartment. It had slanted ceiling, a bed by a dormitory window, a kitchen, and no dividing walls. William had a daytime job as a dishwasher at the time, and he didn't want her to work at all. It was also reported that he worked at a farm as a laborer in Heinsberg, 50 miles south of Burlington. He wanted her to be basically pregnant. To illustrate this, he nailed a diaphragm, a female contraceptive device, above the front door. Michelle's brother still lived in Burlington, and she would spend time with him and his friends, but William kept to himself. They didn't get to know their neighbors, and they spent a lot of time with one another, which brings us to Rita's murder. On the night that Rita was murdered, Michelle and William had a fight. He told his wife that he was going out for a cool-down walk. It was during this walk that he beat, raped, and strangled his downstairs neighbor to death. He likely was familiar with the vehicles that belonged to Rita and her roommates and noticed that, there was only one in the driveway. He probably checked the back door, found it was unlocked, and let himself in, and he quietly really made his way to Rita's room, found her sleeping, and attacked her. After finishing this heinous deed, he took a moment to pull out a large cigarette, smoked the motherfucker, threw it on her goddamn body, and just dipped. smoldered it until it extinguished on its, it extinguished itself under her arm. He then made his way right back outdoor, leaving a couple spots of Rita's blood on his way out. As the part of the initial police canvas, like I said, they did interview over 100 people. At 7 a.m. the morning of Rita's murder, Burlington PD officer Richard Garrow went upstairs to talk to the third floor neighbors. He spoke to both of them, and they vouched for one another, saying that they had been home all night. Michelle even said that, she had been awake around the time of the murder, and she had not heard anything. Detective Winterbottom, too, went to the third floor, making contact with Michelle only, and she also reiterated that she didn't hear or see anything. Vermont State Police Trooper Bruce LaHoo also spoke to them, and again, he spoke to only Michelle, who said that she heard and saw nothing, and neither did her husband. In a recent 2023 interview with the police, Michelle admitted that she obviously lied. She said that William had asked her to lie because he was a convicted felon, and he convinced her that he had nothing to do with it, and that he would be likely become like a cop's scapegoat of the murder because he obviously had a criminal history. So she believed him, and the cops believed her. So there it is. She said that she remembers sleeping in the same bed as him that night, but couldn't recall if they had sex or not. She didn't remember any wounds or scrapes on his body or anything out of the ordinary in his demeanor. She said that William smoked cigarettes, but she did not. She couldn't really recall what brand he smoked, and large cigarettes didn't really mean anything to her in that sense. The thought crossed her mind that he could have maybe committed the murder, but she said that it was inconceivable because he would have no reason to do so, having never met Rita or even set foot in their apartment. But she admitted that she never asked him directly if he had really committed the murder. She said that if she had seen anything indicating that he was involved, she would have quietly gone to the police, but again, she just didn't see anything. A short time after the murder, in the fall of 1971, we're going to dive into William DeRuza's fleeing to Thailand and all this stuff. So a short time after the murder in the fall of 1971, William moved to Thailand without his wife, suddenly changing his dreams of having family, a barbershop, and all this bullshit that he was telling her. Yeah, all out the window. They had an understanding that she would follow him shortly. When asked why they didn't go together, especially as newlyweds, she hesitated and thought carefully. She kind of seemed confused and said that she didn't really know. She repeated, "Why didn't we go together?" Then guessed that perhaps it was because they only had enough money for one of them to travel. Whatever. Shortly after he left, she moved in to another apartment in Burlington and started working as a nurse out of necessity. 6 months later, in March of 1972, she joined William in Thailand and learned that he had become a monk. But that had been disrobed, which stripped him of his status. They traveled to Thailand for a couple of weeks, and then he found a new monastery where he began again to call himself a monk and become a monk. And she became a nun. She said that they had never had much of a relationship after that point because it was, quote, against the rules. She stayed with them for about a year and a half in Thailand, but things came to an abrupt end. William wanted to travel another country without her, but asked her to finance the trip. This guy, William, God. She was done. She never saw him or spoke to him ever again after this. Thank God. I guess it's like the 17th strike at this point. Never saw him again. And the rest of her life, she returned to the United States. She had to hire an attorney to help her get the legally divorced from him without obviously his signature. By 1974, William had returned to the Zen Center in San Francisco again, and it was there that he met Sarah, who had just arrived around the same time. She was living at the Zen flat, which was just like 2 blocks away from the center, and she had met him at a flat and knew him by his nickname, Dutch. William lived on the same floor as her and asked her to spend time with her from, one-on-one and time to time. She described him as tall and slender, with short brown hair, and he frequently covered it with a hat. They bonded over meditation and, obviously, cycling and, Buddhism. He was mild-mannered, she said. He mentioned that he had been previously married and he had lived in Thailand, but failed to mention that he had never legally divorced his wife. Sarah described to William as, quote-unquote, a guru and an influential speaker. So, he's obviously a sweet talker. He had the power over the people, mental hypnosis kind of thing. Sarah thought of herself as a lost hippie who was under his spell. So she remembered William used cocaine a lot and possibly intravenously using it between drugs, but said that they really didn't have any money for hard drugs. She remembered he drank heavily and took an antipsychotic prescription medication called Thorazine that is often used to treat schizophrenia. So yeah, we got a possible schizophrenic murderer monk amongst us. Lover, man, pimp, boy. Yeah, sweet talker. Whew. William's father was an actual hypnotist, with an office in Vero Beach, Florida. So these guys are just known scammers. There are numerous ads in the Palm Beach Post advertising his services. Sarah fell in love with William, and they married that same year on November 9th. Within 4 months of meeting one another. Strangely, though, Sarah said they never established their relationship and wasn't sure if they were exclusive. She repeatedly described himself as very insecure. William and Sarah were married for 4 years, from 1974 to 1978, and Sarah remembered a few violent incidents that stood out from that rocky marriage. These are ridiculous. Ridiculous. One time, a mutual friend, Ophelia, was visiting them, and while they were all seated and talking amongst each other, William pulled out a large pocket knife that he normally carried on him, and without any real reason, he stabbed Ophelia on the side. They had not been arguing, and she was completely dumbstruck as to why he had done it. Ophelia went to the hospital and was admitted to the ER. Police later came to their apartment and arrested William, and he spent the night in jail and returned to the apartment the next day, like brand new, acting as if absolutely nothing has ever happened. William asked Sarah if he had stabbed Ophelia. She said that he had, and he seemed to understand her. But then she went about his business. They never discussed it ever again. And he showed no remorse for what had happened. She didn't recall him even facing an assault with a deadly weapon charge. I mean, he's schizophrenic, but I mean, Sarah, baby girl, come on. You gotta get checked too. All right, in another incident that gets even better, William strangled Sarah with his hands to the point that she nearly lost consciousness. They were drinking and William went on a rant. She didn't engage with him, and that seemed to enrage him. Again, William forced no legal consequences, William faced no legal consequences, and they went on without ever addressing it again. So, first, William stabs Sarah's friend at dinner for no reason, doesn't face any charges. Then another day, they're just talking, having a drink, and William just starts strangling her to almost her she's unconscious. And again, she was like, well, I'm not gonna do anything again. Anyways, another time, William bought an AR-15 assault rifle during a camping trip in Sacramento. She said that William was gone for 5 to 7 days after having been arrested by, quote, the feds, in which she believed he was in jail. Oh, really? After returning, they again didn't discuss the incident. No fucking wonder. Though their 4-year marriage, they traveled through California, living in different apartments together or out of their beige colored Plymouth Duster. Neither of them were working at the time, and they were living off their welfare and social security income. Sarah remembered Sarah remembered them living at the Triangle Motel for 6 months in the summer of 1978. She went out for a bike ride, and when she returned home, she found him in the bed with another woman. She left him that day. Within a couple of months, she found a new man and was living with him around September of 1978. One day, William showed up to their place without any notice. She had no idea how he even figured out where she was living. Although he wasn't even confrontational, she thought he was acting weird. He stayed for a good part of the day and then left, after which she never saw him ever again. So this man is full-blown just crazy. This same year, William's Japanese stepmother, Nobuko, and his father divorced after 30 years of marriage. Nobuko had been his primary mother figure from the time he had been 9 years old until 39 years old. It's unclear what became of William after this point, but 8 years later, in 1986, William was discovered in a hotel room dead from a morphine overdose. He was 46 years old. His body was cremated. He died 37 years before Rita's crime would really be solved. Why didn't this get solved sooner? Well, William was totally off the police radar. In the years that followed the murder, the list of suspects maintained by the police grew to 15 names. But his did not appear because, again, they had alibis. The wife had lied for him. They really had no idea of why they would even pursue it. It wasn't until the case was revisited in the late 2010s that his name was added to the list by Burlington police detectives. And, what if police in 1971 had insisted on taking a close look at his knuckles, took pictures of them or something? He had just badly beaten Rita's face, leaving blood all over the floor. Surely he had some sort of nicks and scratches. What if they had asked him what kind of brand of cigarettes that he had smoked? What if they had asked to search his apartment looking for any bloody clothing, or separated him from his wife and questioned him individually? The narrow window of time in which the crime was committed, just 70 minutes, and the fact that the roommates outlining the evening, was spontaneous choice, suggests that it was a crime of opportunity by someone who was obviously nearby and who was knowledgeable about who the tenants were and the vehicles they were driving. In hindsight, William literally seemed like the perfect candidate. Other than the few brief discussions that they had during the police investigation and the canvassing, remember, they interviewed his wife twice, but they didn't interview him twice. They had only interviewed once. William Drews came up one other time in the police records. A confidential informant came forward 1 week after Rita's murder and met with the two of the primary detectives, and he had said that William was capable of committing a violent crime. In the police notes, William's alibi was immediately referenced, casting doubt on the possibility that he was actually just even the killer. In terms of the physical evidence, it had only been, past few years that genetic genealogy had been utilized by law enforcement. So from that standpoint, the investigation had been moving quickly. It's a blessing that Mary and Tom, who are in their early 70s, are both alive to get the news that their sister's killer had finally been identified. Now again, it's all because of Michelle's alibi. And a question that has been, has arose during the press conference, now in 2024 is, would Michelle be charged with a crime for lying to the police, But again, it is what it is. Rita's roommate, Raul Robinson, told the Daily Beast in 2021 that he had remembered that the walls being extremely thin, and he said that the idea that nobody heard anything is almost impossible. If Rita was screaming her head off at the first floor, what would sound have traveled to the third? Would Michelle even have heard, Rita screaming? Assuming that William's clothes were even bloodied in the struggle, what would he have done with them? It was in the middle of the night, and he was on the cool down walk. So he probably, it's a lot of things. He probably could have came back home, showered quickly. Michelle didn't even see it. It's all, it's unfortunate, really. But it is a crazy thought that, this guy was a manipulative, schizophrenic monk who got away with murder and abuse, apparently. Well, my opinions on this case are just kind of cut and dry, really. I mean, it's crazy to think that, this guy DeRuse, William, really, it's just crazy to think that William was just like this, guru, schizophrenic, manipulative, abusive man who somehow, manipulated these women into these scenarios. And, unfortunately, Michelle was the first one, I guess, he met her in this guru thing, and then, green-eyed guru storytelling kind of man, just crazy. And, abused, Michelle to the point where, she didn't even know what was going on. It's crazy that he even introduced himself as hey, yeah, I'm a serious Buddhist, but yeah, I've been to prison 2 times. And then it's crazy that, unfortunately, that he did commit this crime, and then he would just completely again leave to Japan, join the monastery again, and then find another woman to manipulate, and then stabs her best friend, and then strangles her, and then AK-47 and all this AR-15. I mean, whatever. It's just, it's a crazy story. I don't know, man. I've actually recorded this twice because I kept getting more information, and I just needed to just make it more detailed to really understand like how much manipulation this guy was doing, and it's just so crazy. But yeah, unfortunate, Rita. I mean, this is such a crazy case. 2023, 2024. I mean, genealogy, baby. It's just so powerful. Anyways, if you got all the way up to here, which is crazy because my analytics say that only 5% of you get back here, leave a comment so I know who you are. I appreciate y'all. Until next time, love y'all. Bye.